those represented in our national and provincial legislatures and those outside these structures to do everything in their power to mobilize the people to register as voters. This appeal also extends to all other people's organizations and institutions of civil society. They need to use their influence to organize the people to register for and participate in the local government election. It is also the obligation of all political organizations that will participate in the local government election to ensure
Well, a good morning to you, and thank you so much for joining us on SABC News, independent and impartial. I'm Naledi Moleo with you for the next hour. Now, we're doing a show very differently today because the news has come out, of course, just this morning of the passing of the ANC Deputy Secretary General, Jessie Duarte. The ANC releasing a statement this morning saying the party's Deputy General Secretary has died. She will be buried later today, according to Muslim rites. She was born Yasmin Duarte in New Clare in Johannesburg on the 19th of September in 1953. Jessie Duarte was to enter politics at a very young age. She was only 15 years old and in high school when she organized a stay-away march for which she was suspended for. We are now joined for reaction by Samkele Maseko, SABC News reporter, as well as Hajra Omarjee, Business Day political editor. Samkele, a good morning to you. Thank you so much for giving us your time. Samkele, of course, joins us outside the home of Jessie Duarte in Observatory. Samkele, I think first things first, your reaction to the news as it came out this morning.
Jessie Duarte had been ill for quite some time. You remember that she took time out as the ANC's Deputy Secretary General to the Niehaus, and it was later confirmed when there were allegations going around of accusations that she had passed away. She then issued out a video recording saying that she is battling with cancer and that she is trying to survive and get back to full health. Even the ANC's National Executive Committee issued out a statement warning all ANC leaders from interacting with Jessie Duarte after a request from her family that she be given time in order to recuperate at home, particularly after there was also a burglary here at her home and the security had to be beefed up due to those intense factional battles within the...
Just stop, Samkele, for a moment. Some trouble there with your sound. We're joined by Hajra Omarjee on the line as well. Hajra, before we went on air, you talked about how difficult this is, a moment for you. I think your initial reaction to the passing of Jessie Duarte this morning.
She was a woman of incredible strength and incredible loyalty to the ANC. So I think condolences to both the family as well as the African National Congress this morning. You know, journalists had a somewhat complicated relationship with Jessie Duarte, and I've known her for some time. She is somebody who committed 100% to whatever the ANC decision, whatever the ANC line was, and that caused her to clash with journalists many times while in office as the Deputy General Secretary of the ANC under former President Zuma, as well as under President Cyril Ramaphosa. But if you got to know Duarte well enough, you would understand the reason she clashed so strongly with journalists at various moments over the last 20 years is because there was a lot of things that she too wanted to say as an ANC leader, but she could not say because she had a professional responsibility to defend the party line. I've spoken to her a few times over the last few months, and it seemed as though she was responding well to chemotherapy. There seemed to be hope that she would emerge from cancer. and that she didn't want to remain in the ANC leadership. She was happy to go into retirement, and I guess this will now be her final send-off, not just on behalf of the party, but also the country.
Yeah, well, so stand by for us, Hajra, and thank you so much for making time. Let's catch up once again with our very own Samkele Maseko, who is, as I mentioned earlier, outside the home of Jessie Duarte. I hope that the sound is a little bit better now, Samkele. Tell us about your initial reactions. So we'll start from the beginning, your initial reactions to the death of the Deputy General Secretary of the African National Congress and what you're seeing outside her home at the moment. All right, so still some issues there with Samkele. As we try and get him on the line, Hajra, I'm going to just quickly go back to you. You talked about those conversations that you had with the Deputy General Secretary. Will you let us in on some of those moments that you had with her about how she felt about the trajectory of the African National Congress?
Well, she believed that the ANC was doing all that it could do to rebuild state capacity, post-state capture. She believed that the findings and recommendations of the Zondo Commission were incredibly serious, and she believed that they should be fully implemented despite the tensions that would cause within the ANC itself. She was really very much a party person until the very end. In the one example that I'll give to you where we clashed, I was live on TV and I was doing a show on e-tolls, and we literally fought live on TV, and she threatened to walk out of that TV news set. And when I tried to understand why she had been taken so aback by my questionings on e-tolls at the time, I realized it's because she also believed that e-tolls should not be on Gauteng's roads, but she could not say it because she had a professional responsibility to defend the party line. If you knew Jessie Duarte, who preferred to go by the name Yasmin Duarte over the last year, she even changed her WhatsApp profile name to Yasmin Duarte, you will know she was incredibly strong, incredibly powerful, and showed 100% loyalty to the ANC, despite it being an ANC that she sometimes disagreed with, or despite it being a Jacob Zuma, a Zamokuhle, or a Cyril Ramaphosa in office.
Yeah. Samkele, are you there with us now? So we're trying to cross to Samkele Maseko now, who's outside the home.
We've just heard what the sentiments.
Go ahead, Samkele. I know you're outside the home of Jessie Duarte. What have you hearing?
Yes, indeed. What we are hearing is that ANC leaders are indeed in mourning. We have seen the former Secretary General of the ANC, Hajra Omarjee, who's now the national chairperson, coming out of the family home, very distraught. Earlier on, we spoke to Nomvula Mokonyane, ANC head of organizing, who's worked with Jessie Duarte extensively, particularly here in the province of Gauteng, where the membership of Jessie Duarte was in. They are all distraught. She is still currently inside the family home with the ANC's head, which is Phoebe Potgieter, who is full-time at Luthuli House. She is also inside the family home. They are preparing the political program and the funeral service of Jessie Yasmin Duarte this afternoon, which will take place at the West Park Cemetery. We also do know that the cortege will be leaving the family home at about 1:30 this afternoon for a funeral service that will take place at about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, as confirmed by Abbas Dango, the brother of Jessie Duarte. Earlier on, when we spoke to him, we also did speak to businesswoman and friend of Jessie Duarte, that would be Daphne Nkosi, who said that she met Jessie Duarte in the 80s and they became very close and they became sisters, and she is very distraught at the passing of Jessie Duarte, who succumbed to cancer in the early hours of this morning. One of the first ANC leaders to actually come to the family home when the news came out of the passing of the Deputy Secretary General was the ANC's former Secretary General, that would be Hajra Omarjee, who arrived at the family home at about 4:30 in the morning.
And, we talked a little bit with Hajra earlier about Jessie Duarte's relationship with the media. Now, if anyone is following you on Twitter, Samkele, they know that you call yourself on Twitter Lord of the Media, and that's a name that she gave you herself. Take us back to that day when she said to you that you, Samkele, think you are the Lord of the Media. It's a fond memory, I think, for South Africans.
Indeed, on that specific day, tensions were really running high, particularly with the Deputy Secretary General of the ANC. She was under an extreme amount of pressure. Well, at the time, I had no clue what was happening behind the scenes at Niehaus. All I knew was that there was contentious issues surrounding the suspended Secretary General of the ANC, Ace Magashule, at the time, and that the ANC did not want him to go out to the media to address the media because there were allegations hovering around him, particularly around the asbestos matters, which he was later on charged for with businessman Edwin Sodi. The Deputy Secretary General of the ANC at the time took a swipe at myself and my then employer at Hyde Park, and the slogan they had adopted in the 2016 local government elections, and had somehow found a way of intertwining it with my style of journalism, saying that I want people to shiver and to be scared whenever I come around and to ask questions. And tensions were eventually ran high, and saying that I'm trying to be an advocate of a democracy I never even fought for. But 3 days later, when she gave me a call to apologize for the scenario, she then took me into confidence of what was happening at the time at Niehaus. There were those allegations around the Secretary General of the ANC who was suspended, Ace Magashule, the battles that were there. And also there were allegations against Pula Mabe, the spokesperson of the ANC, on rape from Kekane, an ANC member from Alexandra, who had alleged that Pula Mabe tried to force himself on her at St. George's Hotel. And at the time, Pula Mabe had not been suspended by the ANC and wanted to do his job, wanted to be alongside the Deputy Secretary General of the ANC at the press briefing. She was having none of that. It was Dakota Likhwete at the time who had been roped in as one of the spokespeople of the ANC, and Amos Pacho was also in that room on that particular day when tensions ran high. The DSG then said to him, Samkele, I was under a lot of pressure. Your questions came at a time when I am battling with these issues, particularly within the ANC. Yes, I was wrong to attack you. I was wrong to say this and that. I apologize. But please understand, I'm facing these issues surrounding Pula Mabe. There are these issues surrounding the Secretary General of the ANC, Ace Magashule. There are those whom are accusing me of wanting to take over as the Secretary General of the ANC and having sold out former President Jacob Zuma. So she was very coy at the time of what was happening, and then eventually spoke to me on what was happening and apologized. So she was very feisty. She was a congresswoman right up until the end. If there's one thing Jessie Duarte loved to the core unconditionally, it was the African National Congress. And as Hajra correctly put it, she at times disagreed with the ANC of Cyril Ramaphosa, the ANC of Jacob Zuma, and the ANC of suspended Secretary General Ace Magashule. And she was vehemently against some of the stances that the Secretary General of the ANC, who suspended Ace Magashule, was taking, of attacking the ANC, taking the ANC to court, and some of the public pronouncements that the Secretary General was making. She was vehemently against them, and these were some of the issues she was fighting internally within the ANC. And she also loved her family dearly. She loved her brothers dearly. She loved her sisters. She loved her siblings. She loved her nieces, her nephews dearly. She loved her son dearly. You also just go back to how she had lost some of her brothers through COVID-19 and other illnesses in the past year, and how devastated she was. And she was continuously going to bury her loved ones in the past year or so, until she also fell ill due to cancer, and she had chemotherapy recently, and she ultimately succumbed to cancer in the early hours of this morning. But she was a very loving individual who spoke her mind at times and spoke vehemently against tribalism that was taking place within the governing party.
Yeah, I want to go back to the contribution that she's made to the African National Congress and to the country throughout her political career. And I don't know how many South Africans actually know this, but she was recruited by Albertina Sisulu back in 1979 to help set up the structures of the ANC Women's League within the party. Hajra, let's talk about some of those career highlights throughout her very long-spanning political career for you, some that really stand out as a key contribution to the party and even to the country.
Well, I think Samkele is quite correct. She stood vehemently against tribalism. She stood for non-racialism. She stood for economic liberation, and she stood for gender inequality. Even in moments where it was really difficult and she clashed with the leadership of the ANC, be it Jacob Zuma, Ace Magashule, or Cyril Ramaphosa, she remained 100% a party person. She's really been the engine of the ANC for the last 20 years. And perhaps without that engine or that backbone, which Jessie Duarte has been as the Deputy Secretary General of the ANC, we could have long seen the ANC being voted out of office. That for her meant very little sleep. She often worked until about 1 o'clock in the morning and was up at 6 o'clock in the morning. But if you look at the major political battles the ANC has fought, even the night that it recalled former President Zuma from office back in 2018, she was the engine that delivered that decision. And it's a massive loss for the ANC, although I would expect many in the party would argue that Duarte learned hard lessons as a deployed cadre of the ANC, but she was an exemplary example of that.
Yeah, Samkele, is the ANC weaker going into the elective conference and even the 2024 elections without Jessie Duarte? Samkele.
In essence, yes, one would say that they are weaker going into the 55th National Conference without Jessie Duarte. She was effectively the engine of the African National Congress, as my colleague Hajra has put it. I remember there was a time when the ANC was going through one of its most difficult periods. Going towards the 54th National Conference in December, you'd go back to when they were recalling former President Jacob Zuma in 2018, when they had come from their pilgrimage in Limpopo and going to Mahlambandlovu to recall former President Jacob Zuma. She was one of the people who was tasked to go and relay the message of the ANC, recalling the former president of the African National Congress. She would disagree vehemently with the president of the ANC, Cyril Ramaphosa, now on the economic trajectory of the country. She was one of the people whom would speak out on certain issues, particularly that are going wrong within the country, that they feel that need to be addressed. You'd remember of late she had come out to bat for Lindiwe Sisulu, ANC NEC member and Minister of Tourism, when it came to her stinging open letter to on the judiciary and her views on the judiciary and the trajectory that the judiciary is taking in the country, and how she feels as if there needs to be some sort of change when it comes to the mindset of the judiciary in the country, casting aspersions that the judiciary may have been captured, saying that Lindiwe Sisulu is entitled to her views and to also disposing her views within the battle of ideas within the public domain as South Africans debate this issue of the judiciary. I am reminded of when the ANC Youth League was facing some turbulent times, particularly in the era of Colin Maine as president and Jabulo Nzuza as secretary general, and you go to the province of KwaZulu-Natal, where one now regional secretary of the ANC in the Nokamba region, formerly known as Far North region, Virus Nampalala, was dead and buried within the ANC Youth League through factionalism. She was one of the people who went down to the province of KwaZulu-Natal to sort out the issues of the ANC Youth League. So she was pretty much abreast with the leagues of the African National Congress, the ANC Women's League, the ANC Youth League, and some of the turbulent political differences that these leagues faced. She was one of those ANC leaders who was part and parcel of trying to find resolutions to the problems of the leagues and the problems that they were facing. In fact, I am just going to ask that we hang on to this broadcast as one ANC NEC member and one of the ministers is arriving. We are going to ask that
we try and speak to that specific leader of the African National Congress who is arriving now. You can see the blue light convoy that is arriving now, who is going to come out of the vehicle, and we will try and get a word from Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini, who has worked extensively with Jessie Duarte over the years. We will try and respectfully get the views of Mama Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma as she comes among many ANC leaders who are coming to pay their respects on the passing of Yasmin Jessie Duarte, the Deputy Secretary General of the ANC. Condolences to you, Mama Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini. Just your words of the passing of the Deputy Secretary General. You've worked with her for a number of years.
Thank you very much. Yes, it's very sad that Comrade Jessie is no longer amongst us. At the same time, we are very grateful for her life, because she gave her life and her all to the movement of the people, but also to this country. I worked with Jessie when we came back from exile. I worked with her at Foreign Affairs. She was a diplomat at some stage, and I've worked with her in the organization all the time. She leaves a very rich legacy that we must emulate. She was one of those who spoke out her mind. She was one of those who didn't lie to herself. She was one of those who guided all of us. And she was really a center of gravity in the ANC right now. And she was a great feminist. She believed in the emancipation of women. And so we have to carry on what she did. As the ANC, she was the servant of the people. We must continue in her footsteps. And our condolences to her children, to her family, and to the ANC at large.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, ANC NEC member. Just on a parting shot, Mama, before you go inside, on the legacy of Mam Jessie, she had been described as the engine of the organization in a very difficult time. How would you describe her role as the Deputy Secretary General, particularly in the run-up to the Nasrec conference, where the ANC was faced with huge difficulties and issues of tribalism in other provinces such as Limpopo?
She was a great believer in the unity of the ANC. She was a great believer in multi-racial ANC, and she was a believer in the non-sexist ANC.
Condolences, Ma'am Nkosazana Dlamini. Thank you very much once again, ma'am. That is Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma as she goes to pay her respects inside the home of Jessie Duarte, the former Deputy Secretary General of the African National Congress, as a number of ANC leaders are continuously coming in to pay their respects. You can see in the visuals we are showing you now, that is businesswoman Daphne Nkosi sharing a hug with Mama Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma as they go and pay their condolences to the family of Jessie Duarte as she is collecting Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma as they go inside the family home, echoing the same sentiments that my colleague Hajra Omarjee, the editor or political editor of Business Day, whom had said that Jessie Duarte was not only advocating against tribalism, not only advocating for gender equality within the country, but she was also advocating for non-racialism within the country and speaking against some of the topical issues and standing her ground. And she was an individual who would never, ever lie to herself. But she was also shrouded with a number of controversies, particularly around her son and the business links that her son had with the Gupta family. Some had also clubbed her up within the factions of the African National Congress. You could sense that she was one of those who would speak out within the National Executive Committee of the ANC. The one which comes to mind is when she spoke about how the ANC leadership was treating its former president Jacob Gedleyihlekisa Zuma, and how there was a huge detachment and a huge gap in the relationship between President Cyril Ramaphosa's African National Congress leadership and that of his predecessor Jacob Zuma, and some of the troubles that the former president of the ANC was facing, and how the ANC was nowhere to assist former President Jacob Zuma. When you look and you go and recall into those leaked audio recordings of National Executive Committee meetings, it shows you and tells you of the differences that were there within the ANC NEC, and particularly when you go to that meeting that the ANC top six had with former President Jacob Zuma, and the views that Jessie Duarte was expressing about the judiciary in the country, about Deputy Chief Justice then Raymond Zondo, now Chief Justice, who is the chairperson of the State Capture Commission of Inquiry, and how they treated former President Jacob Zuma. She was not shy to voice out her views, no matter how factions in the ANC perceived her to be part of the RET faction within the ANC, or to have sold out former President Jacob Zuma to join the Cyril Ramaphosa faction within the ANC, but also the close relationship that Jessie Duarte had with the now president of the African National Congress, Cyril Ramaphosa, how she was organizational in processing all of the ANC's National Executive Committee decisions despite her own preferences and her own views, how she was organizational in processing the suspension of the Secretary General of the ANC, Ace Magashule. I recall when we had an exclusive interview with her at her home here in Observatory, how she was clear to say that if the ANC NEC says she must suspend Ace Magashule as the Secretary General of the ANC, she will have no choice but to perform and to do the function that she has been deployed by the delegates of the ANC and the National Executive Committee, which she will go and suspend the Secretary General Ace Magashule, which she thus had to do. How she would compile those responding affidavits of the ANC to respond to the court cases that the ANC was facing in the various provincial conferences which were litigated, how she spoke about political gangsterism and thugs that had taken over the ANC reigns in the province of Mpumalanga, in her own words, particularly leading up to this watershed conference that had just recently taken place in the Mpumalanga province, which was at the Witbank Dam, and how political assassinations, political killings, political violence that had taken place in the province running up to their provincial conference, how she was deployed to the province with Nomvula Mokonyane to try and go on a fact-finding mission on what was going wrong within those branches of the ANC in the Mpumalanga province. So in essence, this echoes the sentiment of how she was literally the engine of the African National Congress throughout the years as the Deputy Secretary General of the African National Congress.
Yeah, well, that's Samkele Maseko outside the home of Jessie Duarte in Observatory, and he's keeping a close eye on who is coming to pay their condolences. And of course, we will dip into him as well once we're able to see who else has come. We just saw Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma also arriving at the home of Jessie Duarte to pay her respects. A few ANC leaders there. Hajra, if I come back to you, it was in 2012 that Jessie Duarte was appointed the Deputy Secretary General of the ANC. And then last year in May, she became the acting Secretary General as the ANC suspended Ace Magashule, who's facing corruption charges. Do you feel that looking at how far she was able to get within the ranks of the party, that she was appreciated within the party in and of itself?
I stand to be corrected, but I think it was before 2012. I think it was in 2007 that she became the DSG of the ANC. I do get the sense that she was appreciated, and members across factions within the ANC understood how much work and effort she invested in the job that she was elected to do as an ANC leader, but also as an ANC activist. I just want to put a small disqualifier on the notes we've said that are the hallmark of Jessie Duarte, be it non-racialism, be it a feminist. Yes, she was a non-racialist. Yes, she was a feminist. Yes, she stood on the front line in many, many struggles for economic inequality, and I can speak to you endlessly about the level of compassion she showed comrades in the ANC that went without and would call her at all hours of the morning to complain. but she was also unapologetically black. It's not a question that I ever felt the need to put to her, because there was no doubt that Jessie Duarte saw herself as unapologetically black. She had worked very closely with the Nelson Mandela, Cyril Ramaphosa's, Jacob Zuma's, Thabo Mbeki's, as well as Cyril Ramaphosa's. But she spoke very vehemently in closed-door meetings about that which she was passionate about. But when the party would take a decision, she would close the ranks behind those decisions. And I think that makes her fitting to be an example of an exemplary deployed cadre of the ANC. There were many mistakes she made while in public office, and there were also mistakes that her family were accused of during state capture, but there were no findings and recommendations against her son when the Zondo report eventually came out. And I think as South Africans are waking up to the news of Jessie Duarte's passing, because, to answer your question, she resonated with across all factions, so long as she considered you a legitimate ANC person, I think South Africans will be surprised at the outpouring that they see for Duarte today. And the only way I can put that into context is to quote Aubrey Mashikre, who's a political analyst, who's long warned us that too much in South Africa, we cast politicians in the role of angels or demons, when in reality, every human being has a good and a bad side.
Yeah. We talked earlier with Samkele about him, being or earning the title Lord of the Media from that incident with Jessie Duarte. And I see you chuckling as well. And if you had watched any of her press briefings, you would have seen that she was very, she was an interesting character, particularly when interacting with the media. Are there standout moments for you that give you the smile that you're showing us right now?
So I've had quite a few run-ins with Duarte over the years, but probably the one that stands out was not the Lord of the Media press conference. I think it was Nasrec 2012, the ANC policy conference, where she was just so hurtful, for the lack of a better word, with the media not trying to understand that the factional debates in the ANC are just around policy, are just a proxy debate for leadership contest, that she chose the wrong moment to walk into the ANC's media center and belittled quite a few young journalists. And I remember that incident quite well, and I remember a few of us telling Duarte why it was so wrong for her to have done what she did. But in those various communications, in trying to, hold your professional line and say, these are the rules of engagement and you may not speak to young journalists this way, I also then got to understand a lot of the struggles and the pressure she was under. What happened with her getting cancer, I think the ANC, in allowing her to rest and be with her family, was the correct decision, because she really did give her life to the struggle against apartheid and then the ANC in its entirety.
Yeah. Hajra, stay with us. We're going to continue this discussion a little bit more. We're paying tribute to the Deputy General Secretary of the African National Congress, who passed away in the early hours of this morning after suffering with cancer for many months, taking leave in November 2021. We'll get more reaction on the other side of this. Do stay with us. Welcome back. You're still watching SABC News, independent and impartial. I'm Naledi Moleo, and we bring you coverage of a story that has shaken the nation this morning. News of the passing of Jessie Duarte, the Deputy Secretary General of the African National Congress, who struggled with cancer for months and succumbed to her illness in the early hours of this morning. We are now joined for more reaction to her passing by Keith Khoza, the former spokesperson of the African National Congress. Dr. Khoza, a good morning to you. Thank you so much for joining us, and condolences to you. Your reaction to the news this morning? Dr. Keith Khoza, are you able to hear me? Okay, he's not able to hear us at the moment, and I know that we had tested. Are you able to hear me now, Dr. Khoza?
How are you, Hajra?
You're speaking to Naledi, Mr. Keith Khoza.
Yeah,
Naledi, yes, I'm muted. Okay, I'm muted, guys. Can we just correct that?
You have guests now. Can you release me?
Okay, so I'm going to just quickly move on. We also have other guests on the line. Hajra Omarjee still with us, of course, the political editor of Business Day, and we're also going to be speaking to a political analyst who is joining us as well via Zoom. That is Dr. Zamokuhle Mbandlwa from the Durban University of Technology. Dr. Mbandlwa, are you able to hear me? Good morning to you. Dr. Mbandlwa? Okay, let's take a short break and try and get those lines back up again so we can get you those reactions. Stay with us. Well, you're still watching SABC News, and we continue bringing you coverage as we pay tribute to the Deputy General Secretary of the African National Congress, Jessie Duarte. We're joined now from the IFP by Mr. Zamokuhle Mbandlwa. Mr. Mbandlwa, good morning to you. Thank you so much for giving us your time. Your reaction as soon as you heard the news of the passing of the DSG.
Thank you very much. Good morning to you and the viewers. On behalf of the IFP President Emeritus, Prince Mangosuthu, the IFP President, and the entire membership of the party would like to extend our deepest and most sincerest condolences to the African National Congress, the Duarte and the Dengo families on this passing of Mama Jessie, whom we had a very healthy working relationship with, very cordial interactions and engagements on a number of issues between the two parties. And so this is a loss that I'm sure the ANC will feel very deeply, and we are with them in this very difficult hour. Mama Jessie, of course, was distinguished in her own right as a leader, as an activist, as a diplomat, and as a leader of the African National Congress. And so we fundamentally believe that she made a contribution to the country, which she did to the best of her ability. And it is now left to those within the ANC to take forward what they will consider to be her legacy. But it is indeed a very sad loss, and we are sending our condolences to the family and the ANC.
Yeah, as someone who operated within or operates within the IFP across from the African National Congress and the National Assembly, and if you look at the African National Congress from your purview, what do you think that legacy is that she leaves behind within the party from the outside looking in?
Well, it's very difficult to say because the ANC is going through its own problems, and its factionalism is deep-seated. But what we don't know is that at the levels of interaction that the parties, the ANC and the IFP are to engage on, including but not limited to the reconciliation question between the two parties, she was always available to engage, particularly through our Treasurer General, Mr. Singh. And so we appreciated the fact that she was accessible and she was willing to engage. You will recall that even when the election results came out in November 2021, there was lots of discussions amongst parties, and Mama Jessie was one of the people that we had engaged with. Of course, those discussions didn't amount to what the ANC wanted, but what was a valuable lesson out of her was the ability to be accessible, the ability to listen, and to be very firm and frank about what she believed, and she placed it on the table. And so it was never difficult to disagree with her or to agree with her, because she was able to listen and she was able to take on board other views. So it would be very difficult for the IFP to determine what kind of legacy she leaves behind for the ANC. Safe to say that I'm sure, deep in her heart, she wanted an ANC that was functional, and one that was true to its mandate, as given by the people to the electorate. Of course, we want the ANC out of power, but what she would have wanted was the ANC to be functional. And so it's up to the ANC leaders now to take forward that aspiration for her.
Yeah. Khuleko Hlangwa, thank you so much for speaking to us. He's on the line with us, paying tribute there to the passing of the DSG of the African National Congress, Jessie Duarte. Sad news indeed. We've got analysis coming from all political parties across the country, as well as political analysts. And we've been speaking to a few media professionals as well, who have talked about how they have seen her contribution to the party, her contribution certainly to the country, and how her interactions with the media certainly do leave some very interesting memories. Samkele Maseko, one of our reporters, you may remember, calls himself the Lord of the Media on social media, and that name given to him by Jessie Duarte herself. And he, of course, is outside the home of Jessie Duarte, keeping a close eye on things for us as leaders of the African National Congress make their way to Observatory to pay their last respects. A little bit earlier on, we also saw the arrival of Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma outside the home of Jessie Duarte, paying her last respects as well, in very somber moments, very somber scenes there outside the home. We are now joined on the line by Mr. Carl Niehaus of the MKMVA. Mr. Niehaus, good morning to you. Thank you so much for your time, and I imagine a very difficult morning for you as well. So we really appreciate your availability. Your reaction to the news this morning.
Hello?
Yes, Mr. Niehaus, can you hear me?
It's very soft, but I'll try, thank you.
Thank you. Just give us your reaction to the news this morning.
I was very saddened to receive the news. I've known Comrade Jessie Duarte for 35 years. My memories went back to the first time that I met her together with Dr. Bayer Snowdeer when she was working with the Christian Institute. And Comrade Jessie has made a huge contribution to the liberation struggle in South Africa. In fact, I think she's one of the great stalwarts of our struggle. I've worked with her over years. In the last couple of years, I was in the same office together with Comrade Ace Magashule in the Secretary General's office of the African National Congress. Yes, there had been times when our relationship hit a rocky patch, but that never meant that I didn't regard her as someone of the greatest integrity and a person who was doing her level best under very, very difficult circumstances sometimes, and her love for the African National Congress could never be doubted.
Yeah. I'm hoping you can hear me with this question, Mr. Niehaus. So where you think this leaves the African National Congress, and perhaps we can talk a little bit about that legacy that she leaves behind. If there's a paying it forward that she leaves, a responsibility that she leaves the party with moving forward.
Yes, it does put the African National Congress obviously in a very difficult position because, as you know, the Secretary General of the ANC, Comrade Ace Magashule, had been forced out of his office. And Comrade Jessie, and I know sometimes very reluctantly, had to stand in and do the duties of the Secretary General. Under the circumstances now, Comrade Jessie having passed on, it leaves a huge void within the African National Congress at a critical time when we are faced with an upcoming policy conference with demands that the policy conference must also be a national general council. And Comrade Jessie has always tried to keep the African National Congress together. She always tried to build unity. I think sometimes she did so at her own peril, and she did so in a way that damaged her own legacy, but she never tried to do anything that could harm the African National Congress. I think there are those within the ANC who today must hang their heads in shame for the situation that they had placed Comrade Jessie Duarte in, and the manner in which they acted, also in terms of the actions that they took against the Secretary General of the ANC, Comrade Zamokuhle, and how they damaged her legacy while she was trying her level best to serve the African National Congress. I've got a very vivid memory of the day when President Jacob Zuma had to hand himself over to the escort prison that night as he was driving out of his residence at Nkandla. I received a call. This was at about 12 o'clock in the middle of the night from Comrade Jessie Duarte, and she was deeply distraught. She was very upset by the fact that President Zuma, whom we all know she was very close to, was now on his way to prison. And she broke down in tears. And she said, "Carl, I don't know how to handle this anymore. I'm trying my best to keep this beloved organization of ours together, but it is so painful." And she kept on repeating the words, "It is so painful."
That's very interesting. Thank you so much for speaking to us, Carl Niehaus there of the MKMVA. We continue paying tribute to the DSG of the African National Congress, Jessie Duarte. If you have joined us, news coming in this morning of her passing at the early hours of this morning after battling cancer for months, taking leave in November to focus on her health. We are now joined via Zoom, and we'll try again with the former spokesperson of the African National Congress, Mr. Keith Khoza. Mr. Khoza, are you able to hear me now?
I can hear you quite well.
Thank you so much, Mr. Khoza. Your reaction to the news as it came out this morning?
Well, it is sad indeed. I mean, Jessie had been at the engine room of the African National Congress in terms of her work as the acting DSG, and her work doubled up when the SG was suspended from the ANC. So she has been the thinking behind many of the ANC's processes administratively, but also in supporting political structures of the ANC. She has been very formidable as a person who is highly principled and who does not waver on matters of principle. So her departure has dropped us who are poorer today than we were yesterday, because we were hoping that at some point Jessie would come back and resume her responsibilities. Little did we know that it would not happen anymore.
Yeah, some standout moments of your interactions with the DSG, Dr. Khoza.
Well, DSG, in terms of the position that she held in the ANC, it requires a person that is very firm, that is very calm, calculated, and who understands the ANC, its traditions, and its history of work. Comrade Jessie was very firm when dealing with ANC leaders. It doesn't matter who you were in the ANC. If a matter violated or was not centered on the people of the ANC, she would take exception and she would tell you on your face. She was also very fierce in terms of ensuring that the alliance functions as a unit, not as disparate entities that support the same objective. And in many instances, she was very firm in terms of what is expected of the alliance as it does its work. In terms of work of the leagues of the ANC, she had a view and she knew that everybody must toe the line as contained in either our guidelines, in terms of our practice notes, in terms of the Constitution, and so on. She was that person who would look you in the face and tell you, no, you're wrong, and it's not going to happen. It doesn't matter who you are. As a result, many people had huge respect for her because they knew that if you try and do something wrong, Comrade Jessie is not going to back off and allow something wrong to happen. Not in her presence, not while she's holding guard of the organization. She would confront issues. She was a very strong matriarch in the ANC.
Yeah.
And I think she vindicated many women, that women in leadership have a solid role to play, and they understand their role in society, both as activists, but as women who have been deprived the role to prove themselves over time.
Let me ask you this, Mr. Khoza. Just a few moments ago, I spoke to the MKMVA's Carl Niehaus, and he talked about the emotions that Jessie Duarte herself showed on the night of the arrest of former President Jacob Zuma. Do you think that some of the challenges within the African National Congress, or what impact do you think some of those challenges had on herself and how she handled them?
Well, in that position that she was holding, at times it becomes difficult to separate the function and the emotions as a person, because your emotions will show up every time an issue that you look at and you think that as a human being, how do I deal with this issue? And unavoidably, when you deal with a mixed bag of issues like that, it might affect your health in some way, because it comes with stress with what it does to any person. So certainly the DSG tried her best, and we think that the pressure of the work certainly would have contributed in a condition, we can't avoid that reality.
Yeah. Mr. Khoza, thank you so much for your time. And once again, condolences to you that there, Mr. Keith Khoza, the former spokesperson of the African National Congress. Thank you as well to all our guests who contributed as we pay tribute to the DSG of the African National Congress. She will be laid to rest this afternoon at the West Park Cemetery. We will bring you rolling coverage of tributes as they continue to pour in right here on SABC News. From myself, Naledi Moleo, and the rest of the team, have yourselves a blessed Sunday.